As we know, in the past 3 years, starting from 2019, the relationship between Greece and Turkey went through a very tense period. But the public opinion didn't seem to reflect that tense relationship, what we have experienced in the macro political arena.
Welcome to the ELIAMEP podcast series. The evolution of public opinion in Greece and Turkey, dynamics and shifts in comparative perspective. That is the title of a very interesting paper that was written by Evren Balta and Ioannis Grigoriadis. And in this podcast, we are going to discuss exactly what we learned from the first joint Greek-Turkish public opinion survey series. I have the pleasure to welcome Evren Balta, Chair of the Department of International Relations in Özyeğin University. Professor Balta, I'm very happy to have you here in this podcast series of ELIAMEP to discuss exactly what we learned and if we have many false perceptions about what Greeks think and what Turks think about the relations between the two countries.
Yes, happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Well, what are the similarities in the views Greeks and Turks have of each other? And what made the biggest impression to you in these findings?
If you have read the paper, we have done 5 rounds of surveys in the last 3 years, and many interesting facts emerged, really. But what was most interesting to me is the stability of the public opinion in terms of the peaceful resolution of the Greek-Turkish conflict. And as we know, in the past 3 years, starting from 2019, the relationship between Greece and Turkey went through a very tense period. But the public opinion didn't seem to reflect that tense relationship, what we have experienced in the macro political arena. So I think one of the most important findings of the report and these 5 rounds of surveys is basically related to this commitment of the public opinion to the peaceful resolution of the conflict between Greece and Turkey. It remained fairly stable throughout the 3 years, as I said, which was a very tense period.
It was from 2021 till 2023. Correct me if I am wrong, that the surveys were conducted.
Yes, the first round of the survey was conducted in 2020. And the last survey was conducted in 2023, I guess in September. So we have been able to see the patterns and trends in the Turkish and Greek public opinion. And we also had a comparative perspective in matters that are crucial both to Greeks and Turks.
Well, so both Greek and Turkish respondents displayed a preference for non-violent means of conflict resolution, but they disagree about both the root causes of the bilateral disputes and the appropriate solutions. Yes. Can you elaborate on this a little bit? Because I found that very interesting.
Yeah, of course. I mean, in terms of when we look at the conflict areas, what we have seen in the last 3 years, Aegean and the Eastern Mediterranean disputes basically played a crucial role in public perceptions of the conflict between Turkey and Greece. I mean, both Turkish public and the Greek public thought that this is the most important aspect of the conflict. And to our surprise, when we first did the survey in 2020, we saw that Cyprus didn't play a huge role or an important part in terms of, explaining what are the major conflict areas or the disputed areas between Turkey and Greece. So for both Turks and Greeks, it was basically Aegean disputes and the Eastern Mediterranean. But how they differed is that in terms of the resolution of the conflict, whereas Greek public opinion favored multilateral means, the Turkish public opinion preferred mostly bilateral talks and diplomacy and bilateral negotiations. And this is expected given that Greece is a member of the European Union. Turkey is not in this and that. But what we see is that there's this really asymmetry in terms of what they favor in terms of the resolution of the conflict. There's this disparity between Greek and Turkish public opinion, I would say.
Well, in this surveys, in this series of opinion surveys, you asked and other things. It was not only about Greek-Turkish relations, which is always a theme, okay, for both countries, but you asked also about how they feel, their views about their country's position in the world. So do they have a similar approach?
I think when we look at, for example, I mean, if I answer your question a bit broad, a bit from a broader perspective, we ask questions about both public's perception about the US, NATO, Russia, and this and that, or external actors. But we also ask questions about self-perceptions and how they pursue their country's strength and this and that. And what I see is that when it comes to relationship with the external actors, I think the Greek and Turkish public opinion is very similar in certain aspects. For example, their suspicion from the US involvement in European security matters seems to be similar to me. The percentages are not that different. In both countries, around 20% of the respondents preferred their country to exit NATO. The relationship or the suspicion towards Russia or the partnership seems to be quite similar, although there are differences. But in terms of how they pursue each other, of course, both Greek and Turkish public opinion seems to be sort of proud of their culture, their nation, and also their values and this and that. But when it comes to strength, we ask questions about strength, specifically economic and military strength. It seems that Turkish public is much more positive in evaluating the strength of their country, right? Turkey. And they think that Turkey is a regional powerhouse or a regional actor, whereas Greek public opinion seems to be a bit more concerned about the economic and military strength of Greece, specifically vis-a-vis Turkey. So there was this disparity between Greeks and Turks. And also, when it comes to the cultural superiority of their respective countries, there was a difference as well. Finally, what I can say, there's this finding that the pessimism of Turks, even though they do think that their country is strong, both regionally and also economically and militarily, the pessimism of Turks have been throughout those 3 years much greater than the Greek public opinion, and that was economic pessimism. I mean, we kept asking questions about what they think about the economy of their country, prospective countries, both to the Greeks and Turks, and we asked questions about whether they think things are going to improve in their countries, both in Greece and Turkey again. So in those 3 years, the pessimism of Turks was much higher than the pessimism of Greeks. And as I said, even though Turks think that Turkey is a regional power with a huge military and economic strength, when it comes to domestic and internal matters, what we witnessed and what we measured is basically this huge pessimism among the Turkish public.
As I've read these public opinion surveys, I noticed also that there were similarities regarding how Greeks and Turks view their internal politics, the institution, the trust that they have in the institution. Can you also elaborate a little bit on that? Because I found that also very interesting.
Of course. So what we see is that in both countries, trust in domestic institutions uh, has been, again, in those last 2 years, although we didn't measure trust in institutions in each survey, we measured it in two waves, I guess, in two of the surveys that we conducted in the last 3 years. And the trust in institutions in both countries have been very low. So 25% of the Greeks, if I remember correctly, and 30% of the Turkish public opinion expressed trust to the institutions. And what was also significant and very much similar in both countries was the fact that the most trusted institution in both countries was the military. And this was around 70% in both countries that the respondents said that they have trust in the military. And the second, and it was followed by the police forces. So it's basically security institutions, police and the military, that was stated by the respondents as the most trusted institutions. And then the divergence began between Greeks and Turks. When it comes to Greeks, the third trusted institution was judiciary, and apparently this was one of the least trusted institutions in Turkey. And presidency is a bit more trusted institution in Turkey, but we see divergence. But what we see, I mean, if I want to analyze or explain what this divergence means, we see that there's this trust in the security institutions, but then Turks don't trust their democratic institutions, more like, I mean, judiciary being the first, not trusted institution. And then there is much more trust in democratic institutions among the Greek public opinion.
And one last question, Professor. We've seen the visit of President Erdogan in Athens. The relations between Greece and Turkey has come to a different level than the last few years. Is that also your perception by being in Turkey, living in Turkey, teaching in Turkey, that things are going in a different way, in a better way?
It seems
Maybe solution, or maybe that we will continue to talk, and we will never go back to the bad relations that we had in the years before.
never going back, it could be an overstatement, because what we have experienced in Greek-Turkish relations is huge ups and downs, right? Not in the last 3 years, but maybe in the last century. So it seems to me that the things are improving, yes, and it is not at the level of, or the tensions are not at the level of what we experienced 4 years ago, specifically in 2019 and 2020. There was a lot of tension, as I said in the beginning of this podcast. But things began to improve. And in fact, I remember that, as you were asking, as a person who's living in Turkey, teaching in Turkey, teaching IR in Turkey, international politics in Turkey, what we have discussing just a year ago, right before the 2023 elections, that the high potential of a hot episode or a conflict between Greece and Turkey. But things very quickly began to change for several factors, I would say. One is that the Turkey's normalization process, or Turkey's foreign policy, has begun to normalize as a response to Russian invasion of Ukraine, Turkey's improving relations with the transatlantic alliance, and the economic imperative, the problems that the Turkey economy is going through. So that's one. And also the electoral process, where you can easily or where there may be patterns of conflict in international politics, has passed. And also the earthquake, where the relationship between Greece and Turkey improved as a result of earthquake diplomacy. So there were several of factors in the last year that helped to improve Greek-Turkish relations. And I do think that that improvement, or this trend, or pattern is not pattern, but this trend is going to continue for some time. But I mean, as you were asking, I cannot say that things are not going to go back to what it was or the tensions will not erupt again. But it seems to me that as a result of these factors, these patterns, the structural factors, things are improving right now between Turkey and Greece.
Professor, thank you very much for this
Thank you.
discussion. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye. This was another ELIAMEP podcast with Odin Linardatou. Recording, editing and sound editing by Petros Karpathiou. Follow us on the ELIAMEP channels on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts and elsewhere.